that Daniel would give his testimony and stand in his lot at the end of days. And so this is referring to that, yes.
But what does it mean? How is it fulfilled?
It's fulfilled in that Daniel is told to seal up the prophecy, but at the end of the days, it would be unsealed, and Daniel would stand in his lot and give his testimony then. In other words, Daniel sees this prophecy, the Lord reveals it to him, and Daniel wants to share it, it seems like, but Daniel's told, seal it up. At the end of these days over here, you'll stand in your lot, you'll give your testimony at that time.
So beginning in 1798, his time prophecies began to be understood.
Yeah, but specifically, we have another quote where Ellen White talks about at the end of the 1335 days. That's specifically what it says in the Bible. And if you want to go there, we can. Daniel chapter 12. And of course, the starting period of this is the daily issue. So it says this. The Bible says that there's a blessing at the end of the 1335 days. Notice what it says here in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 days. So that's 1335 days. But go thy way till the end be, and thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of days. And if you notice this quote from Mrs. White, and I have it in here. Let's see here. Did I pass it? Oh, right here. Yeah, it's in this first statement. This goes along with Daniel chapter 12. In this quote, notice here, right in the middle, there's a sentence that begins, "Blessed are the eyes which saw the things that were seen in 1843 and 44. So she's basically making the statement that in 1843 and 44, there's a blessing that's conveyed to those that saw those things. And that is the same blessing that's being illustrated in Daniel chapter 12, because the 1335 does end at that time. That's the time that the blessing is given. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but the other half of it is, what does it mean to stand in his lot? Is that talking about his spiritual outcome?
It is. According to what the pioneers believed, it also represents that he's going to stand in his lot, meaning that he's going to enter into the investigative judgment of the dead. Because at the end of the days begins the judgment of the dead, right? So if you go to Joshua, let's see here. It doesn't say this much, so much in this. It's not illustrating the words that I want to use, but if you go to the story of Jonah, in the story of Jonah, they had known that they believed that somebody on the ship had sinned against God, and they were going to cast lots to find out who it was that sinned, right? So the casting of lots, or to stand in your lot, is a symbol of judgment. And of course, when they cast the lots, it fell on who?
Jonah.
Jonah, right? And of course, you know how they picked him up and threw him overboard and everything else, right? And so to stand in his lot at the end of days, it means two things. He's going to give his testimony of what he stood for when he gave the prophecy, but he's also going to stand in his lot. In other words, he's going to enter into the investigative judgment of the dead, which actually begins at the end of those days, if that makes sense. Yes?
There was a comment that you made on this slide, I think it would be about the loud cry. Could you tell me what the loud cry in the context of this quote, what that point was that you were making?
Yeah, it's actually on this quote right here. Well, let's read it. It says, blessed are the eyes, I'll start it right where I was. Blessed are the eyes that which saw the things that were seen in 1843 and 44. The message was given. So when she says the message was given, it's given in the context of 1843-44. And there should be no delay in repeating the message. For the signs of the times are fulfilling. The closing work must be done. A great work will be done in a short time. A message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry. And what I stated was that when it says the message was given and there should be no delay in repeating the message, and then she says a message will be given by God's appointment, what I'm saying is that the two can't be disconnected, right? If you don't understand or you're not giving the message, then you won't be giving the message that will swell into a loud cry. You can't divorce them.
So is the message that's going to swell into a loud cry, are you saying that that's the same message that they were giving before, or it's a different message?
Have you ever seen the quote where Ellen White says that we have no new message? She says the message that brought us out of the fallen churches is the message. But with additional mentions, there's additional information, right? It's the same message, it's just more to it, right?
So there's nothing that contradicts this original message. It's just elaborated on.
It's elaborated. Mrs. White says that no new light does away with old light. It builds on the light, right? So when the message went out in 1844, Babylon has fallen, and we're calling people to come out of the fallen churches, that message is repeated in Revelation 18, which is the loud cry angel, and is repeating the message, Babylon the great has fallen. And again, we're to call people to come out of her and be not a partaker of her sins. In Great Controversy, Mrs. White states that that message is the last message that will ever be given to mortals, and that it is the same message as in 1844 with the additional mentions of corruptions that have been coming into the fallen churches since 1844. It's the same message. And in order to be able to give the message, we have to be able to identify what is Babylon and what it means to come out of her. Yes?
This has converting power, this message. When I was studying it and hearing it for the first time in the last, probably within 5.5 years ago, something like that, it just has an awakening power when you see the power of the first angel's message. It's been watered down. I used to teach this in Sabbath school to kindergartners and primary, but I was reading what I had, but it was so watered down compared to all of this.
Right.
It's just so rich.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. Like, so whenever you have a message, you have messengers, right? Okay? So when we're told when the first angel's message was given, and we're told when the second angel's message was given, aren't we supposed to go back and look at the messengers that were giving it? In other words, if Ellen White is telling us that the message was given in 1844, are we to go to 2024 and say what that message is when it differs from the message that was given in 1844? Does that make sense?
No.
In other words, there's a problem if the message that we claim to be given is either only a part, either watered down, or even changed from the message that was already delivered. Okay?
And I'm finding that, quote, conservative Adventists, which is where I would say that I was coming from,
Right.
in my mindset, but I am meeting shocking fear. It's almost like they've been told that stay away from this or something. I don't understand it. There seems to be fear of that somehow it's going to take them away from what they're being taught now, and that they need to stay, quote, with the ship, which they're viewing as right now, what the church is saying right now. And so if this diverges from what they're being taught, there's so much fear. I don't understand it. I'm seeing it over and over again with friends and
Right.
people that to me it's just our history. Why is there such a big deal about it?
Well, I believe I know what it is. This is my opinion. This is not doctrine that I would teach or anything. This is my personal experience, okay, my conviction, I guess. But I'm not going to say that it's gospel. But I believe that the reason why the pioneer messages are so fought against, especially the method of interpretation, is because of the current method of Bible study today that's taught in our schools. And that if you share these teachings that the pioneers taught and the method in which they taught them, that it undermines the new way of teaching, and it makes what they teach and believe worthless. And I'm going to say this, that most of the hermeneutic that's used today in our institutions, BRI and others, is just out and out garbage. It just is. And it doesn't line up with the material that our pioneers taught, the first, second, or the third angel's message. And if you have a degree or something like that hanging on the wall, and somebody comes in and says, well, that's not the way that we're to go, then it is something that they fear, they brace it because that's what they stand for, right? That's the methodology of interpretation today. I don't know of anybody at the BRI or anybody at any of our schools of higher education that are using the methods of the pioneers in biblical interpretation. Yes?
Is the message here, the message was given, are we saying that that's the first and the second angel's message? Or are we saying that that's something different?
Well, in the period between 1840 and 44, all three messages were given, first, second, and third angel. Okay? So the first angel's message was empowered by the message of August 11, 1840, right? Because what happens is that the first angel's message, according to Ellen White, is a message that's based on time, right? And what happens in 1840 is that Josiah Litch, using the day for a year principle and and applying it to Revelation chapter 9, is able to make a prediction that on August 11, 1890, that Ottoman supremacy will cease.
1840.
Did I say 1890? 1840, thank you for catching that. And when that event happens, people are like, hey, if they're right on this, then maybe they're right on this other stuff that they're preaching. And that's what empowers the first angel's message, which is the judgment hour message. And what happens is that, what is the second angel's message? Well, according to the messenger who gave the second angel's message, who's Charles Fitch, the same guy who put together this chart, he makes this argument. And the argument is this: those organizations and churches that don't accept the teaching of the first angel, or the judgment hour, now constitute Babylon, and we have to come out of her. And he says, hold on a second. Babylon is not just the Roman Catholic Church. I was never a Roman Catholic, he says. I was a Protestant. And my Protestant church has rejected the first angel's message regarding these time prophecies. And we need to come out of those churches that are rejecting this message, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. And he includes the Protestant churches in the denunciation of Babylon. So the first angel's message is the message regarding the prophetic periods, which are pointing to the judgment hour, as we know today, as being the time when Christ entered into judgment in the sanctuary. The second angel's message is that any organization or church that doesn't accept the first angel's message now constitutes Babylon, and we need to come out of her. And the third angel's message, which arrives in 1844, which is that if you receive the mark of the beast, you're going to be receiving these plagues, these judgments. And the mark of the beast has to do with Sunday worship. And those that don't have the mark of the beast have the seal of God. And the seal of God is the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is at the heart of the law. And the heart of the law is in the most holy place where Christ is, where we're being judged. So it encompasses that whole message of the judgment hour, right? And these messages are delivered from 1840 to 44.
Does it help to diagram that on a timeline? I think that would be helpful.
Did anybody hear what she had to say?
Somebody did ask a question on here.
Okay, I hope I can answer.
For whatever reason, my phone's not letting me see the questions very well. I'll ask this one first, then we'll go back to the other two that they asked. So they asked, how could they have given the third angel's message in 1844 when the Sabbath truth had not been given yet?
Well, they didn't fully understand the Sabbath, but there were individuals that were believing in the Sabbath. And one of the examples of this would be Captain Joseph Bates, right? But the understanding of the sanctuary message in its infancy was given on the 23rd of October, 1844, the night after the disappointment, when Hiram Edson was walking through the cornfield and looked up into heaven, saw a vision that the sanctuary was not the earth, that the sanctuary is in heaven, and that the cleansing of the sanctuary doesn't represent cleansing the earth by fire, as they had once believed, but the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary from the sins of man after the pattern in heaven. So it's kind of like this. A message can be given, but not everything is fully understood about that message until advancing light comes on the subject.
Okay, and then I think I missed these questions a while ago, but the one other question was, what are the waymarks?
What the waymarks are the different historical events and teachings that make us what we are today. And one of the waymarks, and I would say a really big waymark, is this event that we're talking about today, which is August 11, 1840. This is a huge waymark. It's a place in history that gave rise to the Advent movement in a powerful way. And we need to recognize that waymark, that memorial, that event, and we need to talk about it according to Ellen White and share it with everybody in the church and our brethren and sisters. And if we had been doing that, just to use August 11, 1840 as an example, if we had been sharing this message all along, then everybody would know about it and there wouldn't be people who are saying that it's not true and coming up with other theories.
They also asked, what were the messages given between 1840 and 44, which I think is kind of what we're talking about now, so maybe that was already answered.
Right. Well, those messages that were given from 1840 to 44, I'll kind of enumerate them like this. The first message, and I could be leaving out some messages, this is what I know. During this time, in 1840, the realization of the day for a year principle is empowered in the message given by Josiah Litch, right? What we've been talking about today. In 1842, the message that's born on this chart was given in the spring of 1842. This chart leads to definite time. It is after the production of these charts that started going out that the Protestant churches started closing their doors to the Advent message as soon as these charts come out, because they dealt with it for a while, but as soon as they started talking about definite time and everything, they didn't want anything to do with it. And so the Protestant churches started closing their doors. This leads to the formulation by Charles Fitch, another message, that those people that reject his chart that's given to him from God, those churches that are shutting their doors to this message constitute Babylon, and we need to come out of that.
But was it the rejection of the chart, or was it the rejection of the primary message that's being taught in the chart? Because if we're saying that the first angel's message is worship God, as that's how it's described in
Fear God,
Fear
yes.
God, Revelation 14. And then the second angel's message talks about the hour of his judgment, which we understand.
No, the first angel's message is the judgment hour.
But we understand that that's tied to 1844.
Yes.
All of these charts are bringing out that message. So does that mean, or are we saying that the entirety of the chart is accurate? Or are we saying that that aspect of these charts, which aligns with what the scripture says in Revelation 14, is what's being described here when we talk about the message being given? Because I think it's important to not, what's the message? Is it the entire chart, or is it a central message that's being proclaimed there that harmonizes with what we have in
Right.
scripture? And,
So-
do we, yeah.
Yeah, and
that's
so I just, it's above my pay grade to give that answer, and that's why I gave the answer from Mrs. White, right? And Mrs. White said that God's hand directed this chart. She said that there was a mistake, singular, on the chart in some of the figures, that that it's as the Lord wanted them, and that no one could see the mistake, singular, until the Lord's hand was removed. And when the Lord's hand was removed, he showed us that the mistake was everywhere where it says 1843, it should say 1844.
Right, but isn't that the only thing that she's addressing in the statement? When she says there was a mistake in the figures, that's talking about the time prophecies that
Yes.
miscalculated to 1843.
Correct.
Right, but if that's what she's focused on in that statement, how do we then conclude that she's actually talking about the whole chart, but right now she's saying the only mistake on the chart is the figures?
Well, she says that the Lord's hand was in the chart, in the preparation of the chart. So it's kind of like this. She says that the Spirit of God moved on Charles Fitch to make this chart, that his hand was in the chart. You know, his hand was in the Ten Commandments too, right? His hand is in the chart, and that he allowed a mistake, singular, okay, with some of the figures, which to me states that that is the mistake. And that she says that this chart right here, both of them actually, is the fulfillment of Habakkuk. And according to the prophecy of Habakkuk, these charts will speak at the end and not lie. And so the question becomes, I'll let you answer it. I can't answer it. Is it lying? And would God be in the preparation of something that was a lie?
Well, I don't think that the chart, when she says that, I think that the perspective, the answer is going to lie on whether or not we think she's talking about every single thing that's in the chart, or if she's focusing specifically on the time prophecies that terminated in 1843. Because she talks about William Miller as well, and she says that the things that he preached, that God guided him, but
Right.
she also makes it clear that he made a mistake, but that's in the context of 1843 versus 1844.
Sure, of course.
So, but my point simply is, I think we have to be careful, because to say, I would agree with the question that whoever was on the phone asked about the proclamation of the third angel's message. How did they proclaim that in 1844 when they didn't know about the Sabbath?
Right.
If we say that the message is...
Well, I didn't say that it was proclaimed in 44. I just said it arrived in 1844.
Right, but when we say that the messages that were given would be given again, that doesn't mean that the messages that were given initially were entire at the time that they were given.
Sure.
It doesn't exclude the possibility that they understood the first and the second angel's message, they proclaimed that.
Right.
But there was still more that they weren't proclaiming at that time.
Advancing life, totally agree.
Right. For example, she also says that the third angel's message, the righteousness of Christ, is the third angel's message in verity. They knew nothing about that at this point.
Well, actually, that's not true.
They didn't know. If they knew it, well, they knew something about
Ellen
the
White
righteousness
says
of
herself
Christ.
that she had been saying ever since 1844 the exact same things that Jones and Wagner were saying,
Right.
except that they were putting it in a new framework.
Right.
And in the quote of Habakkuk chapter 2, it says in there, the just shall live by his faith.
Right. But the point that I guess I'm trying to make is, I think we have to be careful that we're not saying that what the pioneers understood from 1840 to 1844, that there's nothing that would be added to that there wasn't any.
I don't think that anybody's saying that. Ellen White is saying that all the messages given from 1840 to 44 to be made forcible.
Right, but the question is, what are those messages?
And that's what we're going over right now.
Right.
And one of the key messages that was given in 1844 was the midnight cry message. Right? And that message, Ellen White says, is the message that empowered the second angel's message and allowed God's followers by faith to enter into the heavenly sanctuary by faith. Right?
Right. But giving a message forcibly, if we're not identifying what that message is.
Well, I just did.
But if we're saying it's the first, are we agreeing that the message that they gave was the first and the second angel's
And
message?
third.
And we're saying, okay, the three angels' messages. Is that
Well,
what we're saying?
what I'm saying is that the first angel's message predates 1840, right? Because the first angel's message is the judgment hour message, right? This is a message that is delivered to William Miller and his followers that predates 1840, right? But what happens in 1840 by the Revelation 9 event is that message is empowered, right? Because people are like, they see that the day for a year principle, which is the method that Miller and his associates are using to bring about this judgment hour cry message, is real, right? And this leads to them then taking Miller's message, which is the judgment hour message, and illustrating it on this chart right here. Okay, whether everything on the chart is accurate or not, that's what they believed, right? And Ellen White says that God directed the publishment of this chart, that he was in it, that there is a mistake on it, right? And that the mistake was revealed, right? Now, what happens here is that this chart right here, and not to say that this is solely the first angel's message, it's an illustration of the first angel's message. Okay? And in here, you have the angels right here. These are the woes and everything. And in this chart over here, you also have the angels that are being illustrated. So what's happening here is that this chart right here is writing the vision. And what is the vision, essentially? The vision is going all the way back to Daniel, right? Okay? The vision is for many days. This is the vision. Write the vision, make it plain on tables. And so what happens here is that once this chart is put together, making the message plain, because that's what the order is. Make the message plain on tables. Write the vision, make it plain on tables. So this is the vision on a table that was commanded by God, delivered to Charles Fitch, and published by Joshua B. Himes. Once they take this plain chart that's easy to be understood, relatively speaking, and they start taking it into the churches, that event closes the door to the Protestant churches. No longer is Miller's message accepted because now it's being made plain. And what you're saying is that Jesus is coming and that there are these time prophecies that indicate this, this, and this. And we don't want that message here. So they shut the doors. They shut the doors because of the message, but this was the part of the message that convinced them to do it. Okay? So I'm not saying that this is the first angel's message in the sense that the first angel's message is fear God and give glory to him for the hour of his judgment has come. But this is the evidence for the judgment hour. Okay? This is their evidence for the judgment hour.
The evidence, though, as they understood it at that time.
As they understood it. And what Mrs. White says, once again, is that light is advancing, but new light doesn't do away with the old light, right? So it was the understanding that they had. They are the one that gave the first angel's message. And Ellen White says if we want to know what the truth is, go to those who gave it. Right? God entrusted them with a message. He gave the message. It doesn't mean that additional light doesn't come, but we have to be very careful about removing pins and pegs from the foundation to make the messages
But I guess
better.
my question or concern is like, when we talk about the pillars or the foundation of Adventism, like, how do we truly define that? Because, yeah, there are things that they taught. For example, we've talked about the interpretation of the fifth seal, or the fifth trumpet, rather. Are we saying that there's no room for advance or for progressing light on those points? Are we saying that because these charts identify the fifth trumpet as being linked to Islam, that any future views that disagree with that, like, are we saying that that's apostasy or
Yes.
heresy?
Yes, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
But that is where I'm going back to my point, which is, if she is saying that if the focus of the message that they're giving at this time is the first angel's and the second angel's message, those messages don't have anything to do with how you identify the trumpets. They have to do
It actually
with
does.
the judgment hour, which is the